This episode is sponsored by Arqueo Gato Tours. Want to dig deeper into Mexico's indigenous past and present? Allow Arqueo Gato Tours to customize your Yucatan adventure. Arqueo Gato works hand in hand with local indigenous guides to provide a tour that is entertaining, educational, and beneficial to the local community. For an adventure like no other, check out arqueogato.com. That's ARKEOGATO.com. Or just follow the link in the show notes. Now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so, and why that's so, and why that's so.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of Tales from Atlantis. We are your hosts, Curly Tlapoyawa.
And Ruben Arellano Tlaxkaltekah.
What is up, my brother? How's life treating you?
Just hanging in there.
Man, you're mad busy these days.
I sure am. It's almost like I don't even have time to breathe.
Damn.
That's how busy and stressed I am from all the busyness. I'm involved in too much stuff.
The general busyness.
It's my life.
Yeah.
Hey, but it's good. I mean, I'd rather be doing something than not doing anything.
Well, that's the worst, right? Then boredom really sets in and you're like, it just feels, I got to be doing something because I'm like a shark, man. You got to keep moving, keep going.
Dude.
Exactly. So this topic today, the Battle of Cagayan. Had you ever heard of this before?
Did you say Cagayan? Cagayan. How do you say that?
Cagayan.
I've never heard of this. I have to be honest. You stumped me with this one here. I have no idea what this is.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, man. It's been popping up a lot on the socials, as the kids like to call them. I figured it was worth
to be fair to me, I looked it up here. I went over to my new best friend, Gemini, and asked him, hey, tell me a few things about Cagayan. And it says, the battle is not well known outside of the Philippines and Spain. This is likely due to the fact that it was relatively small scale conflict and that it took place in a remote location. So, unless you're a Hispanophile or someone from the Philippines who knows their history, no one else is really going to know this. So
yeah. So I thought it would be interesting as it falls within the purview of our podcast, given the alleged involvement of Tlaxkaltekah warriors.
Oh, that's the connection
that's the
here.
tie-in.
Tlaxkaltekah.
Heck yeah.
Because I was wondering about that.
Yeah, on its face, it's like, well, what are these guys talking about? But what did you say? Your new friend, Gemini?
Gemini.
What is that?
Yeah, Gemini. Gemini is Google's version of the AI.
Oh.
They call it Gemini.
We're not sponsored by Google nor
No, we're
Gemini,
not.
by the way. I just honestly did not know what that was.
Yeah.
So it's like an AI-powered search.
Yeah, it basically does what the other AIs do. You ask it a question or you put in a prompt and it'll return some results.
Nice.
So I just use it instead of Googling now. Sometimes Google is still useful because there's certain things that Gemini can't do, but you can pretty much ask Gemini anything and it'll populate it with stuff that's already out there on the internet. So
Interesting. I'll have to take a look.
Yeah, you should, because you know what it does. The good thing about this is that it eliminates all the ads that come with doing just the standard Google search, and just gives you like a bullet point list of things and relevant websites that you might want to follow up with.
Oh, sweet.
Things like that.
I'll have to take a look. Well, with that, dear listeners, I want to begin this episode with a simple, humble request. Please do not rely on social media posts as your sole source of historical and archaeological information. This should not be a controversial statement. Yet every day my various feeds are inundated with well-meaning individuals who were uncritically sharing and reposting pseudo history without bothering to check the sources or seek outside information. It really grinds my gears to borrow a statement from my esteemed co-host. People see something online and they just hit share, and it sounds interesting, and so they just share it, and then it multiplies, and now you've got bullshit just spread throughout the internet, and nobody bothers to do any fact checking. And that's a little...
Because facts be damned. I mean, that's been the name of the game for several years now.
Absolutely.
I'm hearing people are saying...
Yeah. I'm just asking questions. But I heard... So TikTok in particular is easily, in my opinion at least, the worst offender when it comes to the spread of pseudo-history, pseudo-archeology, and general conspiracism. Now, this might be just because TikTok's the most popular delivery system for bullshit right now, but it just seems like TikTok is really made for the purpose of spreading nonsense. The speed with which a short video containing absolute nonsense can be created and shared on TikTok is truly impressive. And thanks to its algorithm, those who consume such disinformation are repeatedly inundated with more and more nonsense, creating this never-ending loop of paranoid conspiracism and pseudo-historical groupthink. Now, one such outlandish claim that frequently pops up on pseudo-history promoting social media sites is our topic for this episode, the Battle of Cagayan. Now, for those unfamiliar with the general narrative, it goes something like this.
In 1582, a small battle-hardened group consisting of 40 Tlaxkaltekah and Spanish soldiers defeated 1,000 Japanese samurai at the Battle of Cagayan in the Philippines.
Now, I mean, on face value, I hear that, and my instinct is to be like, yeah, no, I seriously doubt that fucking happened.
You know what this reminds me of?
What's that?
The old Spanish trope, well, more than Spanish, more like a Eurocentric trope of how the handful of Spaniards who went into Tenochtitlan and defeated an entire empire, it was just like 100 Spaniards with their swords and against thousands of Aztecs who couldn't defend themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like along the same lines.
Yeah. The Spaniards definitely enjoy this trope of we are unbeatable, especially when our backs are against the wall, and against all odds, we can pull off these superhuman feats. As these battle-hardened warriors. Well, I agree. It does bear resemblance to that. I thought it would be helpful for our audience to hear for themselves one of these social media posts that is pushing this narrative. Check out the way that this is presented. It's pretty interesting.
Did you know that one of the most epic battles in history took place between Japanese samurai and Mexican indigenous warriors? As a Spanish colony, the Philippines was administered by Mexico City. At the time, indigenous soldiers made up more than 90% of Spain's military in Mexico. In 1582, a fleet of between 600 and 1,000 Japanese pirates, some of them Ronin samurai, began raiding Filipino villages in Cagayan. A Spanish military unit that was stationed nearby, made up of only 20 Tlaxcalan warriors from Mexico and 20 Hispanic soldiers, were dispatched to repel the Japanese. The Spanish unit launched a surprise attack by land and by sea, firing cannons from ships, forcing the Japanese to retreat to a nearby fort. When the Japanese offered to leave in exchange for compensation, the Hispanic side promptly rejected. The Japanese made one last charge, but the Hispanics and the Tlaxcalans held their ground by utilizing a series of trenches they dug. At the end of the battle, the Japanese surrendered and left.
We'll be back after a quick break.
This episode of Tales from Aztlantis is brought to you by Aztlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromatlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. So, I mean...
So, are you telling me that none of that is true, Curly?
Well,
because it sounds pretty legit. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I'll admit, at face value, this story sounds pretty badass, right? I mean,
it does.
I want to see the movie version of this because it sounds like the plot of a movie, the
Nickelodeon, if you're listening.
But it's like you just asked, is this actually what happened? Did a small band of spunky Tlaxkaltekah and Spanish soldiers really vanquish 1,000 Japanese samurai in a Thermopylae-style beatdown in the Philippines? Well, not exactly. So, and for those who don't know, Thermopylae is, if you've seen the movie 300, that's what I'm referring to for you.
So did he say 1,000 in that clip? Or maybe I missed it.
Yeah, he said 1,000.
Okay.
So
1,000.
Historical documentation regarding this event is sparse, to say the least. In fact, we only have 2 documents, letters that were written by Spaniards about the event. And these letters reveal questionable, often contradictory statements that strain the fabric of believability. Now, here are the 2 letters in full. The first letter is written by Juan Baptista Roman on June 25th of 1582. And it goes, see, I got to fight the urge to read it like one of those Civil War documentaries. Where he's like, my dearest Sheila, the battle against the Confederates was harsh today. But
you sound like the old man from Futurama. What's his name? The old scientist.
Oh, the professor.
The professor.
Good news, everyone. That guy.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to resist the urge to, really over enunciate the most illustrious and excellent sir.
Yes, please.
So the letter...
Spare us, Curly. Spare us.
Just this once. Most illustrious and excellent sir. I do not know whether the letters with new information which the governor is writing today will arrive in time to go on this ship, which has been dispatched to this port of Asabite. So I wish to give your excellency notice of what is going on. Yesterday, St. John's Day. In the afternoon, there arrived 6 soldiers who had gone with Captain Juan Pablo de Carrion against the Japanese, who were settled on the river of Cagayan. They say that Juan Pablo sailed with his fleet, which comprised the ship Sant Giuseppe, the admiral's galley, and 5 fragatas. Fragatas. From the port of Bigan, situated in, does that say Ilocos?
I think so. Ilocos. Yeah.
About 35 days' journey from Cagayan. As he sailed out, he encountered a Chinese pirate, who very soon surrendered. He put 17 soldiers aboard of her and continued his course. While rounding Cape Borgador near Cagayan, one fair morning at dawn, they found themselves near a Japanese ship, which Juan Pablo engaged with the admiral's galley, in which he himself was. With his artillery, he shot away their main mast and killed several men. The Japanese put out grappling irons and poured 200 men aboard the galley, armed with pikes and breastplates. There remained 60 arquebusiers. Am I saying that right?
I think so.
Arquebusiers firing at our men. Finally, the enemy conquered the galley as far as the main mast. Exciting stuff. This is, I'm picturing it in my head. There our people also made a stand in their extreme necessity and made the Japanese retreat to their ship. They dropped their grappling irons and set their foresail, which still remained to them. At this moment, the ship Sant Giuseppe grappled with them, and with the artillery and forces of the ship overcame the Japanese. The latter fought valiantly until only 18 remained, who gave themselves up, exhausted. Some men on the galley were killed, and among them its captain, Pero Lucas, fighting valiantly as a good soldier. Then the captain, Juan Pablo, ascended the Cagayan River and found in the opening a fort and 11 Japanese ships. He passed along the upper shore because the mouth of the river is a league in width. The ship Sant Giuseppe was entering the river, and it happened by bad fortune that some of our soldiers who were in a small fragata called out to the captain, saying to him, "Return, return to Manila, set the whole fleet to return, because there are 1,000 Japanese on the river with a great deal of artillery, and we are few." Whereupon Captain Luis de Callejo directed his course seaward, and although Juan Pablo's fired a piece of artillery, he did not and could not enter, and continued to tack back and forth. In the morning he anchored in a bay, where such a tempest overtook them that it broke 3 cables out of 4 that he had, and one used for weighing anchor. He sent these 6 men, these are the original 6 men he's talking about, right, that are telling him the story. He sent these 6 men in a small vessel to see if there was on an islet, how do you say that?
I think it's islet.
Yeah.
Any
water, of which they were in great need. The men lost their way without finding any water, and when they returned where they had left their ship, they could not find it. They met with some of those Indians who were in the galley with Juan Pablo's, from which it was learned that Juan Pablo had ascended the river 2 leagues and had fortified himself in a bay, and that with him was the galley, which had begun to leak everywhere in the engagement with the Japanese. The Indian crew was discharged on account of not having the supplies which were lost on the galley. Most of these men went aboard the Sant Giuseppe. They said that the Japanese were attacking them with 18 sampans, which are like skiffs. They were defending themselves well, although there were but 60 soldiers with the seamen, and there were 1,000 of the enemy, of a race at once valorous and skillful. The 6 soldiers came with this news, and on the way they met a sailor who had escaped from a Sangli ship which had sailed from here with supplies of rice for Juan Pablo. He says that the Sanglis mutinied at midnight and killed 10 soldiers who were going with it as an escort, who had no sentinel. This one escaped by swimming with the aid of a lance that was hurled at him from the ship. Moreover, I have just detained some passengers who were going on this ship, because there are no troops on these islands, and 100 soldiers have to go immediately as a reinforcement, although the weather is tempestuous. I expect to be one of them if the governor will give me permission. These enemies, who have in truth remained here, are a warlike people, and if your excellency does not provide by this ship and reinforce us with 1,000 soldiers, these islands can be of little value. May your excellency with great prudence provide what is most necessary for his majesty's service, since we have no resource other than the favor your excellency shall order to be extended to us. Yeah, this guy's an ass kisser, huh?
Mm-hmm.
The governor was...
They all have to be.
Yeah. The governor was disposed to send assistance to the ship, which was a very important affair. But after these events, he will not be able to do it, because there do not remain in this city 70 men who can bear arms. May our Lord guard them, most illustrious and excellent person of your excellency, and increase your estate, as your excellency's servants desire. From Sabite, June 25th, 1582. Most excellent and illustrious sir, your servant kisses your excellency's hands. Yeah, more than kissing his hands. Juan Baptista Roman.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you picked up your Mexica calendar for the year 12 Flint? Or how about a paperback copy of the 4 Disagreements? Just visit talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise and show some love for your favorite podcast. That's talesfromatlantis.com for all the latest merchandise. Now, back to the show. Now,
that was a tradition. Kissing of the hand.
Yeah.
I mean, even in Mexico,
Yeah.
like growing up, like I remember seeing that in my dad's hometown. Like when you're a kid, you're kind of expected when you're like if you're walking down the street and you see an aunt or an uncle and you make eye contact, they expect you to go up to them and say hi and kiss their hand.
Really?
Seriously.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's an antiquated custom. I don't know if it's still true today, but it was when I was growing up.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah.
How many hands did you kiss?
Way too many. I had to, man.
Yeah,
I didn't know any better.
You got to do what you got to do,
I'm
man.
a kid.
You're a kid.
It's part of the culture.
Say no.
Can't say
What are you
no.
gonna do? So there's a lot to unpack in this letter, but for the sake of time, I'll just say that we should note that the story did not come from firsthand experience in any battles, but from secondhand sources, these soldiers that happened upon these other people who told them what happened, right? And as we...
Wait. Say that again?
So it was these six soldiers who were sent to go look for water.
Who were sent...
They come back and they can't find their ship anymore. And then they bump into these indigenous peoples who were serving on one of the ships.
So when they say Indian, they mean the Tlaxcalans?
Yes.
Or Tlaxkaltekah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, that part was confusing me. I didn't know if they meant like Indians from India or were they talking about
right. I should have
Tlaxkaltekas?
clarified that. So these soldiers bump into the Tlaxkaltekas who relay this story to them. Like, oh yeah, this crazy shit happened. And even the story that they relay is not the story that's being shared on all these social media sites,
Wait, so the story, the first-hand account comes from the Tlaxkalteca themselves, who told it to those six individuals who had been sent away, who then told it to Juan Bautista Roman.
Yes.
Is that the
chain
am I
of...
following?
Yeah.
The chain of... Okay.
The chain of information. So it was like a game of telephone.
So by the time we get it from Juan, it's already third removed at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it doesn't really match up like what other people have said. The modern interpretations of this event don't really follow what was going on here. And as we will see later, when we contrast the alleged number of participants in the battle to the actual carrying capacity of all the ships involved, the numbers don't quite add up. So we'll take a look at that later on in the episode. So here we have the second letter, which was written after the first, presumably by Don Gonzalo Ronquillo de Peñalosa on July 1st, 1582. If you would do us the honors, sir.
Of course. Royal Catholic Majesty, by this ship which is to leave these islands on the last of June of this year, I am giving your Majesty a full account of the condition of affairs and events in this region. As it was about to sail, news came of the fleet, which I wrote among other things I had dispatched to the effect a settlement in Cagayan, and of the punishment and resistance of the Japanese pirates, of whose coming we had news this year. The fleet sent by me, as above stated, met two vessels of the enemy near Cagayan, one of the Japanese and the other Sanglis. An engagement ensued, and those vessels surrendered after a fierce fight, in which 200 Japanese, among them the commander of the fleet and his son, were killed, while we lost only 3 soldiers. Juan Pablo de Carrion, whom I sent as my lieutenant general in charge of this fleet, continued his journey and entered the Cagayan River, where he was to make a settlement. At the entrance of the river, he found 6 more Japanese vessels belonging to the fleet of those which had surrendered. There was also a goodly number of people there and fortifications. On account of this lack of men, a severe storm having driven out to sea the flagship which he took on this expedition, he did not sack those forts, but attempted only to enter the river. Then he did, going up about 6 leagues, where he made a settlement in a place where he could erect a fort, whence he could direct offensive and defensive warfare against the enemy.
I just want to interject real quick and say we've already got an inconsistency on the amount of Japanese ships that were encountered.
Yeah. I noticed that too. That's why I'm like, wait, what? This news came yesterday, and with all possible dispatch, I am sending reinforcements, boats, ammunition, and the provisions necessary. I considered it so needful to employ the soldiers for this purpose because too small a force remains to me for the aid of Maluco, as I have written, since that undertaking is so important. However, if they send from that place to beg aid, I shall give it with what forces I can, for I suffer a great lack of men and other things because no reinforcements have been sent me from Nueva España, although I have implored them. This land suffers from a constant and pressing need of reinforcements on account not only of its unhealthful climate, but of the many emergencies which continually arise when I must send aid. These occasions now are not so much a matter of jest as they have been hitherto, for the Chinese and Japanese are not Indians, but people as valiant as many of the inhabitants of Berberia or Barbary. And even more so, I entreat your majesty to give careful attention to this, and to order that in all vessels as many men as possible be spent, for it is the key to what is necessary for the preservation of this camp. I beg also that careful attention be given in the other things. The gratuity for the expenses incurred in these necessary undertakings and for others similar to them, which are thrusting themselves forward every moment, which was provided by your majesty's auditors of your Royal Audiencia of Mexico in the ship arriving at this bay on the 24th of last month, consisted of a decree and warrant in which they order that Dr. Sande be paid here for the time while he remained here after my arrival, and until his arrival at Mexico. For this purpose, they set aside in their decree the tributes which belong to your majesty, and order that they be attached to this and sent to them, threatening me with imprisonment if I do not comply. I have written to your majesty already of the poor state of your treasury here, and its many pressing necessities, and of the extreme difficulty experienced in raising the amount of needful for the same. Will your majesty please take suitable action in this? For without the aid of what little resources your majesty possesses here, this colony cannot be preserved. May our Lord guard the Catholic and royal person of your majesty and for many prosperous years, and give you increase of many kingdoms and seigniories for the good of Christianity. Manila, July the 1st, 82.
So it's interesting because the second letter doesn't really add much to the story, right? It briefly mentions it, but it's more like this guy's just begging for reinforcements and for more supplies.
It's a list of grievances for more supplies, for reinforcements, for necessities. Not much there.
And so, the fantastical story.
This is only the second of the only two sources that we know of
it's these two that mention the Battle of Cagayan.
So the first one's the one that gives us the account that we piece together as to what happened. And this one just kind of mentions it and doesn't really go into detail, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's look at the 4 primary claims made on social media and see how well they mesh with the story set out in these 2 letters. So if you will read the claims, please, and I'll read the rest.
Okay. So claim 1, the pirates were samurai.
The primary claim made by pseudo-historians on TikTok and other social media sites regarding the Cagayan battles revolves around the alleged involvement of samurai as the pirates.
Samurai.
Such a cool word. This claim probably stems from the fact that former samurai did sometimes find themselves employed as pirates. In samurai lore, those without masters are referred to as ronin, who frequently sought employment as mercenaries, or in some cases they resorted to banditry. Among them, some turned to piracy and adopted the mantle of woku, a notorious breed of pirates active in East Asia from the 1200s to the 1600s. These former samurai were extremely appealing as recruits for the woku due to their skill in combat. But it should be noted that ronin never made up the majority of these raiding parties. The woku were made up of individuals from diverse backgrounds, such as fishermen, farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and smugglers. Their attire typically lacked armor, favoring weapons like the bow or spear, although gunpowder weapons gradually replaced the bow in the latter half of the 16th century. But we should note that neither letter makes any mention whatsoever of ronin, of samurai, or of anything resembling a professional army. For the most part, the woku were regular men, not warriors. Basically, there is no evidence at all that samurai were present at the Battle of Cagayan, much less an entire army of ronin.
What do you think of that movie Ronin, though?
The one with...
You like that movie?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. The De Niro.
It was pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Claim 2. The pirates were Japanese.
It's often assumed that the pirates involved in the Cagayan battles were exclusively Japanese. Hell, the two letters specifically refer to Japanese pirates. However, the woku were an ethnically diverse group, comprising individuals from various nationalities. These groups commonly consisted of a blend of Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans. Depending on their proximity to China, Japan, or Korea, the composition of woku would reflect a higher proportion of the respective nationalities, right? I mean, this makes sense. If the woku were operating near China, probably going to have a lot more Chinese, pirates.
Wokus.
Yeah, woku. If they're operating near Korea, probably more Korean. If they're operating near Japan, they would be more Japanese. But it was always this ethnically diverse group. It was never mono-ethnic in their makeup.
Do you think they might have, here in the U.S. we have Pirate Day, Speak Like a Pirate Day, or what is it? You ever heard of that? You think they have something like that over there? Speak Like a Woku Day over there.
Maybe.
What would that sound like?
Maybe. All I know is that people, the right-wingers in this country, hate it when you speak like a woku. Given
Claim 3. Oh, wait. Where are we? I lost track.
Given that Cagayan was situated quite a distance from Japan, it's more plausible that the pirates operating there were a mixed ensemble, potentially even including local Filipino recruits.
Claim 3. Spanish forces consisted of only 40 Tlaxkaltekah and Spanish soldiers.
Another remarkable assertion stemming from the events at Cagayan is the purported victory of 40 Spanish soldiers against a force exceeding 25 times their number within a few days. However, this claim contradicts a second Spanish account, which mentions a total of 60 soldiers. So one of those letters specifically says they had 60, and then people are saying 40. Anyway, this reveals a clear inconsistency in the sources. These conflicting narratives underscore the uncertainty surrounding the accurate count. Yet, the focus solely on the number of soldiers overlooks a crucial aspect: the presence of the crews aboard the Spanish fleet, consisting of the galley Sant Giuseppe and 5 small fregatas. Each vessel boasted a trained crew, adept at boarding actions and ship defense, even in the absence of soldiers. So if you have these ships, even if there's no soldiers on them, they would be trained, presumably they would have had to have fight off some pirates before, or maybe enemy nations. These guys weren't just going to sit there holding the oars oh, well, shit, guess we're done for, right?
But also what really impresses me about these people who believe these claims that they were fighting against a force that was over 25 times their size. You have to be a complete rube to really believe that.
Yeah.
Who believes this? Honestly, deep down, if they do a good accounting of the numbers, who believes this happened? Right? Seriously.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
I mean, you have to be completely dense to believe that this is true. Honestly, I'm sorry to say it. I know it comes off as a little arrogant, but come on. Seriously?
We're going to change the name of our podcast to Come On.
Come on. Seriously? Good Good one. Hey, I like that. It's got a good ring to it.
And nonetheless, it was customary for naval ships to carry a full complement of soldiers, similar to modern-day Marines, just in case shit went down, right? I mean, come on. It was a dangerous time for people to be traveling around without any sort of defense or knowledge of how to defend yourself. While precise figures remain elusive, I'm really trying to use that word more because I like the way it sounds so much. Elusive. It's plausible that each fregata accommodated approximately 100 sailors, with the galley and San Giuseppe likely housing larger crews. For instance, the galley, including rowers, might have carried upwards of 200 individuals. Thus, the total Spanish strength could have ranged from 500 to 800 men at a minimum, even without factoring in additional soldiers who may have been added for these expeditions.
You know, honestly, if you really think about it, it's that movie 300 that ruined it for everyone.
Yeah.
Seriously.
It made it seem believable, right? That
Exactly.
this could happen.
You know, like, people believe movies as if they're true. Even the movies that, let's say, it's based on a true story. Yes. Based what? Like, maybe what? The people in it are actual people that lived, but the entire story is completely made up.
Yeah.
That still makes it based on a true story.
Yeah.
And then people go and watch these things and they believe them as to be true and as an accurate accounting of the historical event.
Well,
and so ever since that movie 300 came out, it's like you see more of this pseudo-historical interpretation that usually favors Europeans.
Oh,
you see how
absolutely.
badass we as Europeans are? You know, it just took a handful of Spaniards to defeat the Aztecs. It took a handful of Spanish and a couple of Indian Tlaxcalans to defeat the 25 times more samurai sailors or whatever. And it's like, seriously? You believe that? Honestly? Come on.
Although I got to say, Samurai Pirate is a pretty badass name for a punk band. Might have to get started on that.
Would it be the Samurai Punk Rates? Hey. Claim 4. The Spanish forces were greatly outnumbered by the pirates. Here we go.
The Spanish narratives of the battles tend to be exaggerated. That's like, you know, putting it nicely.
Seriously?
Particularly regarding the scale of opposition that they encountered. For instance, their depiction of a skirmish with a pirate vessel reads,
"The Japanese deployed grappling irons and sent 200 men aboard our galley, armed with pikes and breastplates. Meanwhile, 60 arquebusiers, I'm having trouble with that word too, arquebusers, let's just call it arquebusers. Meanwhile, 60 arquebusers continued to fire at our forces."
So during that era, the largest Japanese vessels were typically atakebune. I'm sure I just fucking butchered that. Which usually accommodated crews of around 150 sailors and soldiers. However, it's conceivable that the pirates might have bolstered their numbers in anticipation of this assault. Nonetheless, this would have roughly equaled the complement aboard the galley. So it would have been like even, you know, if just looking at the size of the ships and how many people they carried traditionally. It's more probable that the pirates utilized a junk, a traditional Chinese ship, as indicated in one of the Spanish testimonies. Additionally, the subsequent engagement with the pirate fleet mentions being overrun by sampans, a type of skiff-style boat, and they're small, assuming that each sampan could carry 10 to 15 individuals at most. This suggests that the Wokou forces in the second encounter numbered at most 200 to 300 individuals. So not the 1,000 that, you know, everybody talks about.
Thousands upon thousands.
Yeah. It should come as no surprise that many of the social media accounts promoting the unabashedly pro-Spanish version of this event are relying not on historical records, of which there are two, but rather on a story from the right-wing Spanish newspaper ABC, or ABC, I'm assuming is what they call it in that part of the world.
Do you know what it stands for, ABC?
I don't. But here's the Wikipedia description of ABC.
ABC is known for generally supporting conservative political views and defending the Spanish monarchy. The paper has also a right-wing stance. Its director since 1983, Luis Maria Anzon, left the paper in 1997 to found another daily, La Razón, which initially catered to even more conservative readers.
So yeah.
Not an unbiased source, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you want to talk about pro-Spanish. They're not going to look at this event uncritically in the way that they present it.
Or maybe critically.
Yeah.
They're not even looking at the source.
Yeah. There's no mention of the sources.
They're just going by the fantasy, by the fable. And, you know, the Spaniards, they're pretty well known for their fables. I mean, going all the way back to, you know, medieval period, which is kind of what spurned the whole notion of the seven cities of Cibola the Antilles. And
they love themselves a good story.
A good story of riches and grandeur, and, you know, so this kind of falls in league with that, right?
Well, the story that most of these from ABC, this right-wing conservative newspaper.
Ding, ding, ding. 1, 2, 3.
The story that most of these social media sites are using as a source begins with the following. And if you'll read the part in Spanish, I'll read the translation in English.
Sí, señor. A sus 69 años, el marino Juan Pablo de Carrión era uno de los últimos supervivientes de la generación más brillante de descubridores y conquistadores que ha tenido España. En los años finales de su carrera le fue encomendada la misión de expulsar a un grupo de más de 600 piratas japoneses, entre los que contaban unos cuantos samuráis desheredados de la isla de Luzón en Filipinas, con solamente un puñado de barcos y 40 hombres en lo que fue conocido como los combates de Cagayan.
So for our non-Spanish speaking audience and people like myself, at 69 years old, the sailor Juan Pablo de Carrión was one of the last survivors of the most brilliant generation of discoverers and conquerors that Spain has ever had. In the final years of his career, he was tasked with expelling a group of more than 600 Japanese pirates, including a few disinherited samurai from the island of Luzon in the Philippines, with only a handful of ships and 40 men in what is known as the Battle of Cagayan. So, propaganda much? I mean, it's this newspaper story.
Brilliant generation.
Yeah,
that's what they were.
I mean, oh my!
These were Enlightenment people. You know, they were like Newton and Locke.
Oh yeah,
you know, those Enlightenment thinkers. They're equals to those guys, right? They're brilliant.
100%. Well, my favorite part about this story that they're using as a source is that the story, the ABC story, is part of a crowdfunding campaign to raise enough money to publish a comic book about the Battle of Cagayan.
What?
A comic book that I'm sure presents the event, you know, uncritically and without questioning its historical veracity. So this is the source. They don't use the two historical documents that actually exist. They instead use this newspaper story from a right-wing nationalistic Spanish newspaper that's being used to raise money to produce a comic book about the event, which I'm sure they want to use to inculcate and indoctrinate young Spaniards, right, into believing the supremacy of their freaking ancestors.
It's like, what was that Disney film from 20-something years ago? The Journey to El Dorado, or what was it called?
The Road to El Dorado.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. But one thing that I want to bring up is I think it's really interesting when you look at the different social media sites that are promoting this story as, you know, historically accurate. the level of participation by the Tlaxkaltecas like raises and lowers depending on who's telling the story. So like if it's more of a Chicano based TikToker, they'll be like, yeah, and there were Tlaxkaltecas. But when you look at somebody who's more of an Hispanista, they don't even mention Tlaxkaltecas. They're just like, you know, the Spanish, what do they call them? Tercios. The Spanish tercio fought off the 1,000 samurai. And so the story, it fluctuates. It's a very fluid story depending on who's doing the telling.
Yeah, well, even ABC, they don't even mention the nationality. They just assume that the readers are going to assume that it's Spanish because they say 40 men.
Yeah.
Like, 40 who?
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
Spanish? Oh, okay. Just 40 of our people against 1,000 of theirs? Man, we're badass.
Yeah, of course we kicked their asses. So, dear listener, I leave you with the following statement from an actual Filipino historian named L. Raposas, who said the following about the Battle of Cagayan.
Whether it was because the surviving soldiers only had secondhand information or it was due to Bautista's own editorial input, the Japanese pirates appeared to be numerous, perhaps even more numerous than the Spanish in the Philippines. The numbers were sufficient enough to sustain a fort in Cagayan even. Then again, there were no other supporting evidence from the account that they really did number 1,000, or for that matter, perhaps even the 260 pirates in the lone Japanese ship the Spanish won against was also an exaggeration. The largest of the Japanese warships of the time, the iron-plated Atakebune or Bukan, could fit 100 to maybe 200 soldiers. There was no indication thus far that these ships sailed as far as the Philippines, especially considering their fortress-like build. Also, they were newly introduced by this time. 6 of these ships were constructed upon Nobunaga Oda's orders in 1578. Also called Tekosen or iron ships, their first appearance abroad may have been during Hideyoshi Toyotomi's invasion of Korea, a full 10 years after the Cagayan battles. The first Japanese ship which Carrion won against may have had as many as 260 in it, but that would likely mean the ship was overloaded. In addition, the Japanese who later attacked Carrion's galley in Cagayan were on board sampans. These flat-bottom boats would usually accommodate only 3 to 5 people. If 1,000 were to fit in 18 sampans, that would mean over 50 pirates on each boat. Think of how that would float. Nice.
Indeed.
I like that.
Touché, sir. So there you have it. Claims made on social media regarding the Battle of Cagayan rely entirely on embellished Spanish accounts, second-hand sources that do not align with historical fact, and apparently GoFundMe pitches for comic books from right-wing Spanish nationalist newspapers. And it's unfortunate because the actual history of piracy, colonization, and the Tlaxkalteca presence in the Philippines is fascinating enough on its own without these fantastical retellings of what occurred during this time. But as for the Battle of Cagayan, the story just doesn't hold water. Yeah, so there you have it. And I like the way that this the Filipino historian just kind of takes it apart in like a paragraph.
Yeah,
right?
Pretty much. Again, as I was saying earlier, who believes this?
Yeah, you would have to be
Honestly.
out of your goddamn mind. You'd have to be like the hardest Spanish fanboy simp on the planet to think that any of this was true or plausible. And what this made me think of, which is a story that is worth telling and we should cover, in an episode, is, Chimalpain actually documented Japanese presence in Mexico in the 1610 and 1614. 2 Japanese delegations were sent. They landed at Acapulco, and there were Nahuas. I mean, that's fascinating to me that there were actually samurai and like Mexica warriors and
side by side,
like interacting with each other,
sizing each other up.
Oh, I'm sure.
I remember encountering that story when I was still in grad school doing research. And I remember I even reached out to you like, hey, you ever heard of this before? Because it was just like out of nowhere, like these Japanese samurai in Mexico in the early colonial period. I'm like, man, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't make it into my dissertation because it had nothing to do with what I was, writing about. But still, it's the fact that that exists or that, that's something that happened. I think we should definitely cover on the podcast at some point.
And I remember the conversation because you were like, have you ever heard of the phrase Hapontlaka?
That's what it was. Hapontlaka.
And I was like, Hapontlaka? Like Japan people? And sure enough, Chimalpain, there's like Nahuatl documentation.
He calls them Hapontlaka.
And he describes what the katanas looked like, their swords.
Yeah, right.
And he talks about the story of how there was like an altercation in Acapulco where one of the samurai stabbed a Spaniard who was like trying to convert people. I mean, like that's the story.
That's a story.
Yeah. Holy shit.
That's a story right there.
But we'll save that for another time. Because, we're at no shortage of topics.
Or we can also talk about the time that the Hapontlaka defeated the entire fleet of Spanish conquistadors at the shores of Australia or something. I mean, it's just as plausible as this story.
Yeah, well, what we like to do here, my friend, is stick to the truth. And
the truth, you say?
You know what I like to say about the truth?
What's that, homie?
The truth, well, it's like medicine. It doesn't always taste good, but it is always good for you.
Wacha.
Hapontlaka timoitase.
Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and lately people have been sending me links to this article on Facebook that talks about this battle that happened in 1582 between Europeans and Japanese samurai. All of this happening near the Cagayan River in the Philippines. Now, in the past, as I was studying Japanese history, I did read about this incident, but didn't go deeply into it. Clearly, this mention made me curious, so I read the article and I found statements such as the following. 40 Spanish soldiers defeated 1,000 Japanese samurai. Okay, already the absurdity of this claim should sort of pave the way to what's coming. As you can see from the title, this is a debunking video. But I'm not attacking just one Facebook article. This story is all over the place. There are several blogs, pages on the internet, and even a Wikipedia page that talk about this as if it were an actual historical event that happened that way. And really what the majority of these articles are trying to push is the idea of, look how superior European men were and their soldiers because of their great armor and their great superior Toledan blades. They destroyed the weak Japanese and their feeble katana that clearly couldn't stand the power of the superior European steel. Ha! Eat that, you weeboos. Like literally, I don't know where academia went.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Atlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromatlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.